I don't know what this Columbus is thinking. We'll fall off the Earth for sure.
It's a really scary voyage. Everyone knows the Earth is flat. If we go on this voyage, it'll be the end of the world.
Yeah, okay. So this whole story about Columbus thinking the world was flat is a long-standing myth that simply wasn't true. And conversations like that one, yeah, it never happened. No educated person in the 15th century thought the world was flat. There are paintings with globes in them to testify to the prevalence of the belief that the earth was round. There's also tons of maps that show exactly what people were thinking, and nobody thought it was flat. But what does Columbus's belief about the shape of the world have to do with Shakespeare? Well, that's why I'm here today, as I have a story to tell you about how Columbus influenced Shakespeare. If you'd like to find out more, then hang on, because that's what's happening right now on That Shakespeare Life. Now, of course, William Shakespeare knew that the earth was round, but like Columbus, the aftermath of his life has been impacted by just incredibly persistent myths. People just love to say that, oh, well, if it's coming from olden times, they must have believed the world was flat. I really don't know why this is so persistent, but it is completely false. Firstly, a round globe concept is much, much older than even Shakespeare and older than Columbus. Historian Jeffrey Burton Russell is quoted on History.com as saying, no educated person in the history of Western civilization from the 3rd century BC onward believed that the earth was flat. So there you go. Obviously, that includes both Columbus and Shakespeare. So why does this story persist? Well, the myth about Columbus persists because of a few very real historical facts that were the victims of fanciful storytelling. You see, the first real fact is that Columbus had a hard time finding someone to finance his voyage. That's absolutely true. The second true fact is that Columbus's ideas about how to get to the New World were controversial. That's also true. The third historical fact that gets muddled about Columbus is that for the Western world, Columbus did discover America. Now, that one is controversial even today. So let's unpack these one at a time, and I'll show you kind of how Columbus fell victim to fanciful storytelling. So you should know that Columbus's intent was to find a new trade route with Asia. At Columbus's point in history in the 1490s, here's what we're talking about. The word India referred to a huge section of Asia. It was not specifically the country of India that we think of today, and it was just a sort of broad section of Asia, was very generically referred to as India, but that part of the world was rich in spices and other valuable goods, which Columbus, and indeed a whole lot of Europe, was anxious to find a new way to get there rather than having to go across land. There was a lot of fighting and problems and danger of trying to get there over land. So they were looking for an ocean way to get around to that part of the world. Now, Columbus believed that you could sail west to get to India, and he needed a royal patron to sponsor his voyage. Columbus was an explorer. It was literally his job to make a hypothesis and then go prove it with his life and his ship and his crew and just dive into the ocean and go see, hey, is this actually the way that it works? And this was what Columbus was looking to find someone to finance. And so, I mean, why the whole flat earth thing? Well, that was the fault of a writer who lived well after Columbus. Washington Irving, an American writer of the 19th century, decided to write a biography about Columbus. And Columbus's story is pretty cool all on its own, but Washington Irving thought that he needed to add some fanciful elements to the story, and so he added the belief that Columbus thought the earth was flat because he thought that was a nice little flourish to throw in there. And he puts in his story that Columbus is trying to challenge the belief that the world is flat. That the Spanish geographers are going, no, no, Columbus, the earth is flat, you're going to fall off. And he's going, no, no, I will prove to you that it is round. And that this was the controversy around his voyage. And that never actually happened. Irving was extremely popular and people took this narrative and hung on to it, but it was never intended to be true, and it wasn't actually historical fact. Now, while it wasn't about the flatness of the earth, there were arguments with Columbus surrounding his voyage. In fact, Columbus had to shop his proposal around in Europe, and he spent nearly a decade trying to find somebody that's going to sponsor this voyage he wanted to take. In the end, Spain agrees, but it was not an easy road to get there. His voyage in 1492 was the result of years and years of rejection, lobbying, and political timing. He approached Portugal, who refused him. They thought his estimates for distance to Asia were inaccurate. Turns out Portugal was probably correct because Columbus seems to have thought the Earth's diameter was smaller than it actually is and that it wouldn't take as long to reach Asia as it really does. Also complicated by, again, the continent. But Portugal had other reasons for wanting to refuse Columbus because they had their own explorer to back, Vasco da Gama, who would actually travel to Asia by going around Africa 6 years after Columbus in 1498. So this was kind of a big thing. Columbus was not hardly the only explorer trying to find a new trade route to Asia. There were lots of people wanting to do this. So Spain actually rejected Columbus the first time he asked, and Columbus is thought to have approached England, which was then under Henry VII, as well as potentially France. Both of those things are questions. We can't prove that he did, but it's plausible, and there are a few bits of evidence to suggest he might have. Now, Spain was approached a second time, and this time an advisor to the King and Queen of Spain promoted and essentially sponsored Columbus financially. And after that man stepped forward and was willing to kind of say, I vouch for him, at that point, Ferdinand and Isabella agreed to sponsor Columbus. Spain was coming out of a war and they were in need of something to help bolster their economy and put stuff back together. So this seemed like something they were willing to try. Everybody expected Columbus to fail, but they said, okay, sure, let's try this. Now, where this is connected to Shakespeare is actually in the evolution of the global maps from before Columbus through the 15th and 16th century until you butt up with Shakespeare. You see, Shakespeare talks about the Earth being round, and he talks about the presence of continents. He writes in Comedy of Errors, "She is spherical like a globe. I could find out countries in her." In Henry VI, Part 2, Queen Margaret remarks about for wheresoever thou art in this world's globe. So obviously there's this idea that the world is a globe which is round, and there are 10 other references to the word globe in Shakespeare's works, not to mention the elephant in the room about Shakespeare and the fact that the name of his theater was the Globe because it was round. So we definitely know what Shakespeare believed about the earth and its shape. So that was my point with all of this, was to share that neither Columbus nor Shakespeare ever thought that the earth was flat. But what does happen for Shakespeare's lifetime that wasn't there before Columbus existed is that Columbus did discover North America, the continent. Now, don't freak out on me here. Let me explain what I mean. It is true that Leif Erikson discovered what is now mainland Canada about 1,000 years prior to Columbus. And you'll hear people say that because a lot of people like to poo-poo on Columbus and say that, he doesn't deserve to have an honorable place in history. I'm kind of Team Columbus, so here's kind of why I'm saying that he shouldn't have that title removed from him. So Leif Erikson was European, and he did discover what is now Canada 1,000 years prior to Columbus. But the thing about that discovery is that while Leif Erikson was European, he was not well known outside of Scandinavia. In fact, the whole idea that Columbus wasn't the first European to discover the Americas is kind of a ridiculous statement to make because functionally no Europeans outside of Scandinavia even knew about Leif Erikson nor about what he had found in the ocean. So for all practical purposes, the educated people, the stuff they were reading, the maps they were consulting, there were no Americas on them until Columbus reported back to Spain, and then it spread out throughout the rest of the Western world. And you can see this in the maps. Maps prior to 1507 show everything left of Europe as a giant ocean. There's no mention of any kind of Americas. The Waldesmuller map, and I'm probably butchering that man's name, I apologize, but it was published in 1507, and it's credited with being the reason this continent is called America at all, because it's the first one to use that name. And that precedent sticks, and from then on out, that section of the world was called America. But what you can see in the maps throughout the years is that a cohesive understanding of what the New World even was far from established, even by the time we get to William Shakespeare's lifetime. So let me show you some examples of why that is. In this map from 1549, just 30 some odd years before Columbus, you can see that every single continent is incredibly close to one another. You can also, I will note, see that the Earth is round. If Columbus was using maps like this Fra Mauro map to inform his decisions, it makes complete sense that he would have expected Asia to be much closer than it ended up being. There's not a lot of ocean on this map at all. All of the continents are very, very close to one another. You can see why Columbus might have thought, hey, I just go around this way and I'll get there real quick. It's a little back door. Why haven't we done this before? Columbus probably felt really strongly about that. I can see why. In this world map, so here's our next example from 1482, you can see that there's absolutely no Americas even shown. Keep in mind that when I'm saying no America, I'm saying there's no North America, no South America, no Central America. The entire continent from Canada to Chile is totally missing from the known world. A man named Münster is making maps in 1553, and he calls his map the Ptolemy map, and it shows the entire world, and the Ptolemaic map doesn't even have any of the Americas either. Münster creates additional maps 30 years later, publishing several maps in the 1580s called world maps when Shakespeare was about 30 years old, and these maps do show both North and South America, as well as some shapes for the Central American countries. By the 1590s, you can see maps of the world dividing the globe into hemispheres. They'll be showing all of the Americas on one hemisphere and then Europe and Asia as the second hemisphere. There are still many maps called Ptolemaic maps being published throughout the end of the 16th and start of the 17th century that show a round world, but they are missing the Americas. And this is 1598. Okay, we're talking Romeo and Juliet is about to premiere at the Globe at this time, okay? And there are still maps circulating that don't have Americas on them. Here's another map that was published in 1587. This is when Shakespeare was 23. This is part of Shakespeare's lost years. We don't know for sure what Shakespeare was doing around this time, but he was getting married, having babies, and possibly working in a theater as a player. Our next example was completed in 1590. William Shakespeare is about 5 years away from our first known successful play in London. And you can see on this map, they didn't have the shape of the continents down pat yet. California is very fat and kind of melty over there into the ocean. And you'll notice that that section of the country is labeled India. And since we're having so much fun sharing things, I wanted to share a few others as well. So here's one from the early 16th century. I'm talking like this map is dated between 1514 and 1564. So right before or right at the start of William Shakespeare's life. And this looks down on the earth from the North Pole. Then there's this one from 1513 that shows North America and South America. But these are so really thin. Do you see how tiny they are? They were showing basically only the coastlines that people had definitely explored by this point. So so all of these maps from huge fat California to this little bitty little sliver, people didn't really understand what was going on in this section of the world at all. And then there's this one. This one is again from the early 16th century. I'm talking like 1510s here, but there's not any North America. There's no South or Central America at all. And this map was done close to 30 years after Columbus. Oh, and there's this one from 1513 that shows North and South America as two islands. There's no Central America here at all. And of course, the shapes of the islands are quite wrong in terms of what we know those spaces to actually be. So why am I showing you all of these maps? Well, I am trying to make the case for you that when Columbus was setting sail, no one in the Western world knew about the giant continent that was in his way. There were some people up in Scandinavia that knew about it, and if Columbus had talked to them, he would have known. But he didn't talk to them, and they didn't know it. So all of the maps that Columbus is consulting and he's trying to make decisions about how to go, it simply wasn't there. He genuinely believed that it was a straight shot through the ocean between him and Asia. And of course it would have been, except for the enormous continent he didn't know about. Now, after Columbus's voyage, you see maps start to include pieces of the Americas. They start showing up, and even into the 1590s and early 1600s, there's a huge variation as to what the Americas included, whether they were on one long contiguous continent or whether it was a set of islands, or even how skinny or wide the sections were supposed to be from coast to coast. These were all questions that were hugely up for debate, even for William Shakespeare's lifetime, which means for people like the Pilgrims who set sail for this continent in 1620, there were tons of questions, not only about how to get where they were going, but the maps they were likely consulting to make decisions about their travel. How many provisions do they need? How long is it going to take to get there? All of these things were varying in their information. And even as they're trying to educate themselves, all of their sources of information disagree with one another. So you can only imagine what a gigantic leap of faith it was to get on that boat and sail to what everyone now knows as the New World without being 100% confident of exactly the answers to these essential questions. So Columbus may not have been the first to discover America, but I think we can give him credit for that because it was his voyage and those that were taking them in the 1590s, like Vasco da Gama, who were creating this knowledge and bringing it back to the Western world. So while Columbus may not have been the first, he's definitely the guy that gets the credit for bringing it to the Western civilization for sure. And he's definitely the reason that William Shakespeare and his contemporaries knew about the continent of the Americas at all. So there you go. That's how Columbus influenced William Shakespeare and why we can credit Columbus with bringing America to light and a good reason to go study some old maps. I hope you enjoyed this little voyage across the sea into the past with me. If you like history and you like William Shakespeare, then please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel because I'm here every week with even more history. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Goodbye.